Hey guys, welcome to the Stand Up Review podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today we're reviewing Iliza Schlesinger's 2013 special War Paint. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by our patrons. If you want to help support the podcast, then head on over to patreon.com/standupreview. With tiers starting at as little as £1, there are some great benefits, such as voting for which specials you want reviewed, Q&As, bloopers, early access to podcasts, exclusive podcasts, and many more. Sign up at patreon.com/standupreview, and thank you for your support. So a little bit of background on Iliza. She first came onto the comedy scene back in 2008 when she won Last Comic Standing. This is her first special. She's done a lot since then. I've seen most of her specials. She's one of my favourite comedians, if I'm honest. I'm a huge fan of hers. In terms of her style, there's a lot of storytelling, there's observational stuff in there. There's a lot of sort of performance comedy. She also does what I call Rant Comedy, which I kind of see as fast-paced, passionate delivery, not necessarily angry in that kind of rant way. It's usually done as like a character, but it's easier to explain within the context of a specific bit, so I'll do that once we get into the show, which let's get into it right now. The show opens to Iliza receiving a huge ovation. She gives a little bit of an introduction, perhaps goes on a little bit too long with it, but it's not too bad. In the first bit, she talks about airlines, where she makes some quite harsh comments. She goes in on them a little bit. But it's very creative, it's very funny. She goes on a bit of a rant. Now, the rant style, it's much more about making very quick points. So she brings up boarding passes, and when she calls gold members, she'll list numerous things related to gold very quickly. Again, it's not really about any kind of emotion or anger attached to the rant. It's just very quick delivery. She then goes on to talking about rescue animal adverts. She tells the story of the advert, gets very creative with it. But this is mainly an excuse to bring her dog out on stage. She explains that she's made up a backstory for her dog. It's very good, perhaps a little bit too long. This is mainly a bit to just get her dog involved in the show, something she does in most of her shows. As an animal lover, it's great, I really enjoy this bit, but she could probably cut it a little bit shorter. She talks about cute aggression, brings up a few quick topics and a couple of good jokes, but this kind of just breaks up two different bits about rescue adverts, which she goes back into, and it's still performance-based. She still makes it creative and funny. She makes it more about the jokes than the actual performance aspect. This shows again as she talks about P90X adverts. This is done in another performance of the advert with some rants mixed in. It's very good. It's not just pointing out the funny parts of the advert or making obvious observations, which can be quite difficult to do, but she actually creates something from it. She turns it into her own joke, where a lot of comedians tend to just point out funny parts of adverts. She actually turns it into her own thing. Afterwards, she talks about women's dieting. She makes some good comments on the women's health industry. And she acts as a good voice for women to not feel like they need to be this way because the health industry is telling them to. But she still keeps it funny. She doesn't change the tone of the show at all. She does well to make a serious point without changing the atmosphere of the stand-up special. In the next bit, she tells the pharmacist story, as I've called it. This is one of the best bits of the show for me. It's a performance. She kind of acts out how she would want to be as a pharmacist. This is very creative. It's so well thought out. It's so descriptive. The attention to detail is amazing. It's a completely made-up story, but she really puts you in the scene, and as I said, the attention to detail and just every little bit of it is thought out. It's so good, and there's a great closing joke to the story. This is one of those bits that I would just recommend, even if you don't watch the whole show. You have to see this bit. Just Iliza Shlesinger pharmacist story, should find it easy enough. The next bit revolves around a KY Intense advert. Again, she talks through the advert and performs it, makes some very good observations, but most importantly, makes her own story surrounding the advert, rather than just talking about the advert itself. It's similar to what she did with the other adverts earlier in the show, But it's a great format and it works, and it's another very funny bit. She then goes on to talk about women trying to please guys. She's got some good commentary on it, and she makes a very serious point without making it preachy. There's a funny rant in there, and she makes the point without bringing down the tone of the show. This kind of bleeds into talking about a girls' night out, where she performs a woman, I suppose herself, on a night out. It's very well done and very funny. There's a chance I don't get certain parts of it. I've never been on a girls' night out, but based on limited experience, it's very good, and it makes some funny observations and some good points about odd things women do on a night out. Within this, she talks about different stages of being drunk. Again, she's kind of performing the night out, and there's a lot of relatable commentary in there and throughout the show more generally. Some of it's quite simple, but she mixes in enough jokes to keep it funny, and sometimes you have to get certain points across in order to progress the story, and she does this without you losing interest at any point. The next bit is about eating in front of a date, and this is very funny, it's very clever, and it's not just a typical commentary. She sets a very creative scene. This bit also involves the only bit of audience participation in the show, which there's a very clear and obvious answer, and the audience responds as expected, but it's well done. It's better to be simple with audience participation than to overdo it, and it can just make the show look awkward if it goes wrong. Afterwards, she tells a few smaller stories. They're all very good. There are some really good jokes in there. It's different to the rest of the show, but it's better to not stretch them out into anything longer than they need to be. Another thing she does throughout the show, which I didn't quite know where to fit into this, but I wanted to mention it. She does a thing where she'll interrupt jokes at an odd detail, and she'll kind of just say, "Oh, I didn't care enough to explain the detail," or "Oh, it's just to make the joke work." It's a little bit hard to explain, and I find this kind of thing very funny. I can see how it would divide opinion, but for me, it's very good, and she does it very well. The show ends with Iliza performing as a girl buying a lobster on a date with a guy, and then leaving before having sex with him. It's a very funny story, and she makes another serious point without making it about that point. She ends the show on a really good callback to a previous joke, which doesn't get anywhere near the reaction it deserves. And that kind of leaves a weird ending to the show, because the audience suddenly realises it's the end, and then they laugh and applaud. But even without the weird reaction, the show does end quite abruptly, and there's probably better places she could have ended it. But at the same time, I can see why she's ended it that way, and I certainly don't hate it as an ending. So just a few little extra notes. In terms of transitions, apart from one or two where there's just blunt cuts, they're pretty much seamless, and you don't realise that one bit is over before the next starts. It's all very joined together very well. It's not forced in any way. It doesn't feel like she's added in a joke or a part of a joke to link two bits together. She just kind of moves on from one thing to the next. Made it difficult to cut the show up into different bits for this podcast, but hopefully I did an okay job of that. The bit from where she's talking about women trying to please men through to the shorter stories is pretty much all one long bit. It was hard to break it up. I'm sure there's points where I've mixed things up a little bit in there, but yeah, her transitions are pretty much the perfect way to do them. In terms of a stage persona, it's very hard to nail down what her persona is. I don't think there necessarily is one. She's very confident of herself. You could say she's playing like a feminist character. She sort of acts as a guide for younger women, making sure they don't fall into certain traps. Again, though, I don't really know if that's a character so much as being herself. There are, she plays characters throughout the show quite a lot, which I think means when she is speaking as herself, she is being herself. And when she's playing a character, that's very obvious that she's then being exaggerating and, She plays a character so that she can be herself when needs be, which is quite well done. Another kind of weird thing, but very good thing, she does little noises, little goat noises, some different voices. It's kind of weird to explain if you haven't seen the show, so I'm just sort of hoping you watch the show and get what I mean, but they really add to the show. She overdoes them a couple of times, but, it's her first special. She does get better in later specials, but we'll talk about that when we get to it. But they're very weird little noises. The goat noise is one that has sort of become a feature of her shows, but I'm not going to try and do the noise. I'm not going to try and explain how she uses it, but if you watch the show, I think it works very well and that it improves any bits that she puts it in. But I think that's something that's potentially contentious and that could be kind of a love it or hate it thing. But for me, I'm a big fan of it. As for the audience, there's not really a whole lot to say. They're very much there for her. She gets a huge standing ovation at the start of the show. But after that, you don't really notice they're there. They don't laugh out of place anytime they're laughing. You are. They don't overlaugh at any parts. There's only one piece of audience participation, but that is seamless and it's quite an obvious thing anyway. So I actually think this is one of the better audiences in terms of watching the show at home, because you're able to just watch it as if you were there, because there's not this extra audience laughing when you're not, or over laughing at a part that's not quite as funny to you. So there's not a massive amount to say, but it's pretty much how you would want an audience to be when you're watching at home. Finally, some overall thoughts on the show. Iliza is extremely confident in her performance. You would never know that this was her first full special. She, with the noises she adds, again, it might not be for everyone, but it's at least worth pointing out that it's something unique. It's something different that at least she's trying to make herself stand out from other comics. In terms of her structuring of the show, all of her bits kind of fall into some kind of story. And one thing she does very well is she won't force the funniest part of that to the end of the bit. If the funniest joke happens to come somewhere in the middle, she won't play down the rest of it. She'll finish the story. It'll still be funny. She doesn't leave in anything unnecessary. But she understands that the big laugh doesn't have to be at the end of each bit. Again, I've spoken about closing of shows before and how that's important to be funny at the end. But at the very least, you don't need that for every single bit. In terms of her performing, usually I'm not a huge fan of big performance comedy. There are plenty of exceptions to that. Iliza is one of those because she doesn't prioritise the performance over the jokes. Any performance is very much there to enhance the joke or to set up a joke. And ultimately, the show would just still be funny without the performance aspect. It's just that the performance makes it funnier, whereas a lot of the times the performance can make it funny, but it wouldn't be funny without that. So Iliza's very good at having the jokes already in place and then improving them with performance rather than glossing over something that's not that funny with a performance. You've probably guessed, but I would highly recommend Iliza. She is one of my favourite comedians. She's brilliant. All of her shows are great. We'll almost definitely be reviewing the rest of them at some point in the future. In terms of an overall rating, I'm going to give Warpaint a 9 out of 10. It is that good in my opinion. Thanks for listening to the Stand Up Review podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to subscribe to get new episodes as soon as they come out every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Check out our Patreon for some awesome benefits at patreon.com/standupreview. If you have any thoughts or suggestions for the show, whether it be a new segment or a show you'd like us to review, let us know on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter at Stand Up Review and give us a follow while you're over there. Feel free to share this or any of our other podcasts on any social media platform. Have a great day and we'll see you for the next episode.